For in-depth talks, joining me is Professor Sung-soo Kim of Hanyang University and UNIST. Professor Kim, thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
President Yoon's trip to Ukraine and President Zelensky's visit to invitation were kept a secret until the very last minute. He and his wife visited the place where a massacre happened. So what message is South Korea sending here, not only to Ukraine, but to the rest of the world?
I think this visit is very important and symbolic for a country that experienced a war 70 years ago and received a reconstruction plan to develop our economy, is now visiting a country that is in need and is asking for a reconstruction cooperation. And I also think that this visit was somehow had a prelude during the G7 summit in Hiroshima, when President Yoon and President Zelenskyy had a short meeting. And I also think that it was timely to recover the humiliation that Zelenskyy had during last year's visit to our Congress and to recover the diplomatic relationship with Ukraine. So we are further discussing how we can advance our leadership in the global society, as President Yoon has emphasized during the Yoon and Biden summit and also in the Yoon and Kishida summit, that Korea will more and more take the responsibility to promote freedom and democracy and a market economy in the world.
Yeah, you just touched upon this, but South Korea and President Yoon has now joined his counterparts from the U.S. and Japan. That is Joe Biden and Fumio Kishida, too, who have taken their trips to the war-torn nation. So what diplomatic message can be taken from this trip?
I think, again, it really goes as an extension to our government's key diplomatic message that Korea will take global leadership. And also, we would strengthen the alliance with countries that share the core value with us, which are freedom and democracy and market economy. So in that line, the Ukraine case is at the center of the Indo-Pacific strategy that U.S. is leading, and it is clashing with the new order that China and Russia is trying to impose. So it is an extension of the Korea, U.S., Japan trilateral diplomatic alliance, and also as an Indo-Pacific strategy to participate Korea in the global leadership. And as a Korean standpoint, it's important to discuss this, although it's a little bit late compared to other countries, because the reconstruction plan is also a great benefit to the Korean economy.
So the visit has a lot of diplomatic meanings. And Professor, President Yoon has drawn a parallel between the current war in Ukraine and the Korean War 70 years ago, reiterating freedom and solidarity during his press conference. What do you read into this?
Okay, so I believe that this is first a legitimacy setting. So in order to participate in the reconstruction plan, there should be two things that should be agreed in the international society and also within Ukraine. First, contribution-based. What contribution did countries made during the Ukraine war? And second, is there a legitimate reason why a country should participate in the reconstruction plan? Of course, we are showing contribution to the Ukraine war, so we are qualifying for the contribution base, but setting a legitimacy that a country that was in need 70 years ago is now returning that core value of freedom and democracy and free market will give a core legitimacy to the international society and the Ukraine government to qualify Korea for participating in the reconstruction plan. So I think that is one of the core reasons why we should emphasize that we are returning the reconstruction plan to set the legitimacy.
Legitimacy, you're saying. And as part of the Ukrainian Peace and Solidarity Initiative, the Korean president pledged more military aid to Ukraine. Supplies. There was no mention of lethal aid provision, though. So do you think there will be a shift in policy under certain circumstances?
That's a very difficult, policy call for the Korean government as well, because it has international and also domestic considerations to pursue a lethal, support. But again, the reconstruction participation is on contribution base. So, of course, Ukraine will prioritize countries that have had shown heavy military support, which are US and other European countries they're doing. So in order to consider a higher priority in contribution, I think the government has a chance to also consider a more active role in military support. But this consideration should be aligned with our future strategy with Ukraine. Because we are really strong in the defense industry right now, as symbolized with our sale of FA-50 to Poland recently. So if we are considering, selling our defense, systems to Ukraine, then the government will engage in a more active consideration of supporting Ukraine, especially our KF-21 will be commercialized sometime during 2026. And we will consider a collaborative strategy in the Ukraine support with the defense strategy and the diplomatic strategy and the economic strategy together.
And they are also taking into account its relationship with Russia when considering providing lethal aid or like US, the cluster munitions.
Right, but I think that the government participating in the Indo-Pacific strategy already sets a strong line with Russia and China. Of course, we should be strategic approaching Russia and China, but just for the fact that we are having a trilateral alliance between Korea, US, and Japan, and participating in the Indo-Pacific strategy is also setting a line. So the government will be a little bit more comfortable in making those decisions.
Right. And Presidents Yoon and Zelenskyy agreed upon cooperation in rebuilding infrastructure in Ukraine. Professor, as you mentioned, the reconstruction, both at government and business levels. So what specific role can we expect from South Korea after the war?
We are strong in many areas. First, we are very strong in construction, as we have a long history constructing the infrastructure in the Middle East. And still, we are one of the most competitive partners when it comes to infrastructure construction. And we are very strong in digital infrastructure reconstruction as well, and energy and health and bio, and also education. So there's a variety of fields that we can contribute to Ukraine, but what they would mostly need is a digitalized infrastructure if it comes a reconstruction plan. And we are very strong in those initiatives. So we should consider a global alliance in participating in those digitalized infrastructure construction. For example, like the latest telecommunication technologies, or digital infrastructure such as data warehouses, etc., and energy. We can also consider nuclear plants in Ukraine because they will need a lot of electricity, and it's the nuclear power plants are the most efficient source to provide mass electricity at demand. And we have really strong healthcare system, so we can cooperate in building hospitals, and also we can also provide education support. We have prestigious universities that can help retrain the Ukrainian, education. The problem with Ukrainian education right now is that a lot of young generation had to evacuate during the war. So there's at least a discontinued education of 3 years, which Ukraine needs a strong support.
A range of cooperation areas. And there's been pledges for more financial and humanitarian support, including a scholarship program. So what stood out to you among these announcements, and why?
One of the core diplomatic strategy of Yoon's administration is human exchange.
Yeah.
So if you look at the Yoon-Biden summit or other summits that we're doing, human exchange is always included.
For future generations.
For future generations, and yes, for students and researchers, I would say. And our economy also grew based on scholarship support from the U.S. government mainly. I'm the secretary of the University of Missouri Alumni Association, and Harry Truman, which is a University Missouri, boy, supported scholarship to Korean students to come study at University of Missouri, and they initiated the economic development plan, starting from Kim Man-jae and Lee Sung-yoon, the vice prime minister, which launched the Korea Economic Development Plan. And that still continues today, having 6 vice ministers in the cabinet, symbolized by Bang Gi-sun and Kim Wan-seop of the Ministry of Finance. And also we have 3 congressmen, symbolized by Song Seok-jun. And those legacies continue to grow the company if we support scholarship programs. And Korea is doing a great job in that through the KOICA program. We support a lot of scholarship to developing countries. And if you come to UNIST, you will see a lot of foreign students studying in UNIST in very, very great dormitories. We have apartments provided to them. So those kind of experience, having support for education, then later returns as the national interest of Korea. So I think that's very important to provide those humanitarian supports when countries are in need.
And this week in Warsaw, Korea forged a cooperation system with Poland for post-war reconstruction in Ukraine. That is worth some $52 billion in time for the summit between President Yoon and his Polish counterpart, Andrzej Duda. What's your assessment of this, and what follow-up measures they need here?
Usually when we sell weapons in the defense industry, it comes as an exchange package of what the selling nation will provide to the buying nation. And so we can consider a number of cooperations in that domain, diplomatic cooperation, economic cooperation, but it usually comes in an economic cooperation package. Of course, Poland will be interested in participating in the reconstruction plan, but Poland does not have the industry base or the technology base to actively contribute in the reconstruction plan, in my opinion. So they need a counterpart like Korea to go together to participate in the reconstruction plan. And I think that it's a win-win situation for Korea as well, because Poland is neighboring Ukraine, and it will be cheaper to supply materials from Poland to Ukraine than importing from other countries far away. So it's I think, a win-win situation where Korea can lead the technology and Poland can provide supplies. So I think that will be a best strategy between Korea and Poland. Then it's a leadership problem. I think Korea should lead which industries and projects Korea and Poland can cooperate together, and in a model that Korea provides technology and leads a project and Poland provides supplies.
Briefly before you go, Professor, the South Korean leader was in Lithuania for the NATO summit this week too. South Korea is ramping up cooperation with NATO and the West. So what does South Korea gain from this diplomatic approach?
So again, the Yoon's administration's key diplomatic focus is showing global leadership and also forming alliance with the countries that share the core value of freedom, democracy, and a market economy. By actively participating in these global initiatives, make other countries more comfortable of including Korea in the global leadership. So as I mentioned, in order to qualify for the reconstruction plan, you have to show contribution-based and legitimacy. So participating in these kind of, important talks, especially in NATO and G7, et cetera, provides a legitimacy aspect. We should consider the case of Japan. While they were showing, great trades, surplus against other countries, and other countries were suffering from trade deficits during the 1960s to 1980s, the international society was asking Japan to more actively participate in global agendas. When it comes to the 1980s to 1990s, Japan contributed with money, and then the international society was criticizing Japan that they were not being more active in agenda setting. So in the Western world or the global society, what's important is qualifying for two things. First, monetary contribution, and also active leadership participation. Right. So those two things should be qualified. So Korea is now taking action as an advanced economy and a leading economy to potentially become G8 in the future. And in order to do so, we have to provide the legitimacy to the international society of why the international society should include Korea in more important leadership roles.
Right. Professor Kim, thank you for your insights.
Thank you very much.